The storm over Mayfair in November 1888 did not merely fall. It possessed the cold, unforgiving weight of iron. Rain lashed against the tall, arched stained glass windows of the grand townhouse on Belgrave Square, where light from dozens of crystal chandeliers spilled into the dark, slick street below. Inside, the season was drawing to its triumphant, suffocating close. Diamonds caught the flicker of candlelight. Silk gowns rustled like autumn leaves across polished parquet floors, and the whispered gossip of the high aristocracy hummed louder than the string quartet playing in the gallery. Standing near the hearth in the grand ballroom, Arthur Pendleton, the 9th Duke of Stirling, adjusted the crisp cuff of his evening tailcoat. At 32, Arthur was a man defined by rigid discipline, burdened by an immense ancestral inheritance, and haunted by the devastating betrayal that had shattered his youth 5 years prior. His presence was formidable, broad-shouldered, tall, with sharp gray eyes that seemed to dissect every insincere smile offered to him by ambitious matriarchs pushing their unmarried daughters into his orbit. He despised the polite lies of Mayfair society. He lived for order, for the quiet dignity of his sprawling Yorkshire estate, Ashridge Park, and for the heavy duty he bore to maintain the flawless reputation of the Stirling lineage. As Arthur drained his crystal glass of dark amber brandy, a sudden commotion rippled near the grand entrance hall. Lord Vance, a notoriously cruel and influential marquis whose debts were as vast as his political power, was bellowing at his trembling servants near the mahogany doors. Arthur's sharp ears caught fragments of the panicked exchange. "She cannot have vanished! Search every corridor, search the alleyways! If she escapes tonight, every man here will answer to me!" Arthur's jaw tightened. He knew Vance by reputation, a predatory man who used his wealth to corner those who had no defense. Whatever, or whoever. Lord Vance was hunting had clearly destabilized the Marquis's usual polished arrogance. Indifferent to the drama, yet thoroughly exhausted by the performative nobility surrounding him, Arthur set his glass down on a silver tray held by a passing footman, gave a curt nod to his host, and made his way toward the rear exit where his private carriage awaited. The crisp night air hit Arthur like a cold blade as he stepped out onto the cobblestone courtyard behind the mansion. Fog coiled around the iron street lamps like pale phantoms, mixing with the heavy rain. His liveried driver, Thomas, stood by the horses, holding an umbrella over the carriage door. "A wretched night to travel back to the hotel, Your Grace," Thomas said, bowing his head as he pulled open the heavy oak and leather door of the private carriage. "The storm suits me fine, Thomas," Arthur replied, his voice a deep, resonant rumble. "Let us leave Mayfair behind. We ride for the London estate, and at dawn, we depart for Yorkshire." Arthur stepped up into the dark, enclosed cabin of the carriage. The air inside smelled of beeswax, fine velvet, and tobacco, and something else, something unmistakable, the faint, delicate scent of wild rose and damp linen. Before Arthur could call out to Thomas, a sudden, desperate movement erupted from beneath the heavy velvet lap rug draped over the opposite leather seat. A pair of small, trembling hands reached out from the shadows, gripping the lapels of his evening coat with sheer, frantic strength. Arthur froze, his hand instantly reaching for the brass handle of his pocket knife, his gray eyes narrowing into steel. "Who goes there?" he demanded, his voice low and sharp as thunder. The rug pulled back to reveal a young woman kneeling on the floor of his carriage. Her dark silk dress was soaked at the hem, her sapphire eyes wide with raw terror, and her pale cheeks flushed from cold and panic. Raven curls had escaped her pinned updo, clinging to her damp neck. She was breathless, shivering uncontrollably, Yet beneath her desperation lay an undeniable, striking grace that no maid or servant could easily feign. "Please," she rasped, her voice a delicate, frantic whisper that trembled with absolute desperation. She pressed her fingertips lightly against Arthur's chest, feeling the hard, steady throb of his heart beneath his coat. "Do not shout. I beg of you, on your honor as a gentleman. Do not call for help." "You are trespassing in the private carriage of the Duke of Stirling, madam," Arthur said coldly, though he did not push her away. "Give me one reason why I should not hand you over to the watch or to Lord Vance's men, who are currently tearing the ballroom apart looking for you." At the mention of Vance, a visible shudder ran through her entire frame. She looked toward the carriage window, where shadows of men with lanterns were already pacing down the cobbled lane. Time had run out. She leaned in closer, her cold lips nearly touching Arthur's ear. Her breath smelled faintly of sweet mint. "He will ruin me. He will lock me away where no one will ever find me," she whispered, her voice laced with an agonizing mixture of fear and quiet resolve. "The Duke found her, hiding in his carriage," she whispered. "Pretend I'm your wife until we leave town." Arthur stared down at her, caught entirely off guard by the audacity of her demand. "Wife?" he echoed softly, a sardonic, disbelief-laden curve touching his lips. "You ask a man whose name you likely barely know to commit a deception that could ruin us both?" "I know who you are, Your Grace," she said, her eyes locking onto his with an intensity that burned through the cold darkness between them. "You are Arthur Pendleton. You are known to be cold, untouchable, and bound by an unyielding sense of duty. You are the only man in this cursed city whom Lord Vance fears to challenge. If I am seen as your Duchess, even for a mile, even for an hour, his guards will not dare lay a finger on me. Save me tonight, and I swear upon my life, I will disappear from your world the moment we cross the London line. I will ask nothing more of you." Outside, heavy leather boots splashed violently through the puddles right beside the carriage. Lantern light flickered against the etched glass of the carriage window. "In here!" a harsh voice barked from the darkness outside. "Check the Stirling carriage! The Duke may still be inside!" Arthur's heart hammered against his ribs, a sensation he had not felt in years. Deception was against everything he stood for. He was a man of cold logic, unaffected by emotional pleas. Yet, as he looked down at the mysterious woman kneeling at his feet, he saw no deceit in her eyes. He saw a creature fighting for her very soul against a monster he detested. Before the carriage door could be yanked open from the outside, Arthur acted. With swift, commanding strength, he grabbed her by the waist and lifted her off the floor, pulling her onto the leather seat beside him. He threw his heavy wool cloak around her shoulders, completely obscuring her torn dress and damp hair, and pulled her head against his chest, wrapping his arm securely around her shoulder. The carriage door swung open with a bang. Cold rain sprayed inside. A high-ranking officer of Lord Vance's private guard stood there, lantern raised, eyes scanning the dark interior. "Your Grace!" the guard stammered, startled to find the Duke himself staring down at him with an expression of lethal annoyance. "Forgive the intrusion, Lord Stirling. A thief, a dangerous woman, has fled Lord Vance's house. We must inspect all conveyances." Arthur did not flinch. He slowly adjusted his cloak around the woman resting against his chest, keeping her face tucked firmly into the lapel of his coat. She remained utterly still, holding her breath, her heart hammering wildly against Arthur's ribs. "A thief?" Arthur's voice was as smooth and sharp as polished marble. "And you believe my private carriage to be a hideout for common criminals, Captain? Or do you mean to imply that the Duke of Stirling harbors fugitives?" "No, Your Grace, of course not. But my wife, the Duchess, is unwell," Arthur interrupted, his tone dipping into a dangerous, icy authority that demanded absolute submission. "The noise of the ballroom overwhelmed her, and I am taking her home immediately. If you disturb her further, or if you dare lay a hand upon the coat of my carriage again, I shall ensure Lord Vance explains your insolence to the House of Lords by morning. Drive on, Thomas." The guard swallowed hard, pale with fear, and bowed frantically, stepping back into the mud. "My sincere apologies, Your Grace. Forgive us." The carriage door slammed shut. The driver cracked the whip, and the heavy iron-rimmed wheels groaned as the carriage surged forward, leaving behind the gleaming mansions of Belgrave Square and entering the dark, rain-soaked maze of London streets. Inside the swaying carriage, the silence was deafening. For several long moments, neither of them moved. The heat of her body pressed against his chest served as a shocking contrast to the bitter winter night. Slowly, cautiously, the young woman raised her head from his chest. She pulled back the heavy wool hood of his cloak, allowing her dark, glistening eyes to meet his once more. "He called you Duchess," Arthur murmured, his voice tight, his gaze searching her face in the pale yellow light of the passing street lamps. "I have just lied to a nobleman's guard and staked my honor on a falsehood for a woman who has not even given me her name." A shadow of deep, tragic sadness crossed her face. She sat up, straightening her posture despite her trembling hands, bringing a refined, undeniable dignity to her soaked silhouette. "My name is Clara," she whispered softly, her fingers knotting together in her lap. "Clara Hayward, and the man you just saved me from is not merely a dangerous nobleman, Your Grace. Lord Vance is my legal guardian, and tomorrow morning he intended to force me into a secret marriage to seize my late father's stolen estate, or have me declared insane and locked in an asylum if I refused." Arthur stared at her, the gravity of her words hanging heavily in the closed carriage. Before he could ask her another question, Clara leaned toward the window, her breath fogging the glass as she peered into the dark rain. Suddenly, her eyes widened in fresh horror. Through the rain-streaked window, visible under the flickering light of a distant gas lamp, two fast-moving phaetons were tearing through the dark street behind them. Lord Vance's personal crest was emblazoned in gold on their wooden panels. They were following the Stirling carriage, closing the distance rapidly. "They did not believe you," Clara breathed, turning back to Arthur, her voice shaking with despair. "They are following us." Arthur looked out the rear glass, his face hardening into granite. The false sanctuary of London was gone. They were bound together now, a duke whose flawless life was suddenly threatened by scandal, and a fugitive heiress with everything to lose. "Thomas!" Arthur shouted through the hatch to his driver, his voice echoing over the clatter of horse hooves and thunder. "Change of plans. We do not stop at the London house. Take the North Road. Head straight for Yorkshire." As the carriage surged into the blackness of the stormy night, pursued by shadows, Arthur looked down at Clara Hayward. He had just brought a storm into his carefully ordered life, and as her frightened eyes locked onto his, he realized there was no turning back. The carriage tore through the storm-swept countryside. The rhythmic clack, clack, clack of iron wheels against the mud-choked Great North Road, echoing like a pulse in the gloom. Inside, the quiet hung dense and suffocating. London was 50 miles behind them now, swallowed by the wet black expanse of the English South, yet the ghost of Lord Vance's pursuit seemed to cling to every creak of the leather suspension. Arthur sat rigidly across from Clara, watching the amber flicker of the small oil lantern mounted on the carriage wall cast long, swaying shadows across her pale features. Under the dark velvet cloak he had lent her, she looked impossibly fragile. Yet the steady, unbroken light in her blue eyes betrayed a stubborn, resolute spirit. For 5 years, Arthur had built an impenetrable wall around his heart, guarding his life and his ancestral name against deception after a bitter betrayal in his youth had destroyed his faith in intimacy. Yet here sat a woman who had shattered his routine in a single, desperate breath. "You said your father's estate was stolen," Arthur said, breaking the long silence. His voice was quiet, a low baritone that cut clean through the howling wind outside. "Explain yourself, Miss Hayward. If I am to carry a fugitive across county lines under the guise of my wedded wife, I will not do so blind." Clara tightened her grip on the wool collar around her neck, drawing a deep, shuddering breath. "My father was Sir Thomas Hayward," she began, her gaze drifting toward the rain-streaked window. "He was a scholar and a landholder in Sussex. When he fell ill 2 years ago, Lord Vance offered to manage his affairs, to act as executor of his estate and my legal guardian. My father trusted him. But the moment the earth was settled over my father's grave, the ledger books vanished. Vance declared the estate bankrupt, seized the deed to our family home, Hayward Manor, and placed me under virtual house arrest in his Mayfair residence." "And the marriage?" Arthur asked, his brow furrowing slightly. "Why force a marriage if he already controlled the land?" "Because the land carries a quiet secret, Your Grace," Clara replied, her voice dipping into a lower, darker cadence. "Underneath the timber yards of Hayward Manor lies one of the richest iron ore veins in the South. My father had discovered it just months before his death and recorded the survey privately. Vance found out, but under my father's original unamended trust, the legal title to the mineral rights cannot be sold or leased by a guardian. It passes exclusively to me upon my wedding day or upon my 25th birthday. I turned 25 in 3 months. Vance knew his time was running out. Marrying me was the only way he could legally claim the iron rights without facing the Chancery Court. Arthur leaned back against the tufted leather seat, his sharp gray eyes assessing her every word. It was a classic, ruthless power grab, the kind of quiet cruelty that infested the highest circles of British nobility. "And tonight was your only chance to break free." "Tonight he brought a corrupt clergyman to the house," Clara said, a tremor final mented piercing her composed demeanor. "The contract was signed in his study. I was told that if I did not sign my consent before midnight, I would be removed to a private asylum in Kent by morning, under the pretext of hysterical grief. I ran through the servants' passageway and into the rain. Your carriage was the only one with its door unlocked." She paused, looking directly into Arthur's eyes, her tone fiercely sincere. "I know the position I have forced upon you, Lord Stirling. If Vance catches us, he will claim you abducted his ward. The scandal would scorch your reputation across every drawing room in London." "Let him try," Arthur said coldly, a dangerous glint entering his gray eyes. "Lord Vance is a coward who preys on those without leverage. He does not hold leverage over the House of Stirling." Yet, despite his stern exterior, a subtle shift occurred within Arthur as the hours wore on. As the storm gave way to a icy, bruised purple dawn over the rolling hills of the Midlands, he watched Clara fight off sleep, her posture unyielding despite her clear exhaustion. When the carriage jolted violence over a rut in the road, throwing her forward, Arthur reached out instinctually, catching her forearms to steady her. For a fraction of a second, their faces were inches apart. Clara's breath caught in her throat. Up close, she could see the faint silver threads at his temples, the faint scar near his cheekbone, and the deep, wounded gravity in his eyes that spoke of a man who had carried immense solitude for a very long time. Arthur felt the soft warmth of her skin through her damp sleeve, a sudden sharp jolt of awareness piercing through his cold defenses. "Forgive me," he said smoothly, withdrawing his hands a moment too quickly, his tone re-anchoring itself in formal distance. By mid-afternoon of the second day, the rain had tapered off into a thick, clinging northern fog. The carriage crested the jagged limestone ridges of the Yorkshire Dales, turning down a vast avenue lined with ancient, frost-dusted oak trees. At the end of the long drive rose Ashridge Park, an imposing Elizabethan manor of dark stone, soaring chimneys, and massive leaded windows overlooking a glass-like lake. The arrival was met with swift, silent efficiency. The elderly housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, and the butler, Mr. Jennings, lined the grand stone steps, their eyes widening in muted shock as the Duke stepped out of the carriage and turned to offer his hand to a disheveled, mud-splattered young woman wrapped in his personal cloak. "Your Grace," Jennings stammered, bowing deeply. "We did not expect guests." "Miss Hayward will be staying at Ashridge indefinitely, Jennings," Arthur commanded as he led Clara into the warmth of the grand hall, where a massive stone hearth blazed with crackling oak logs. "Prepare the East Wing suites. She is under my direct protection. No correspondence leaves this house without my seal, and no unannounced visitors are to pass the outer gates." Over the next fortnight, the quiet sanctuary of Ashridge Park became a backdrop for a slow, dangerous transformation. Clara was provided with suitable attire, simple, elegant day dresses of forest green and deep navy wool. As the days bled into one another, Arthur found his rigid routines slipping. The man who had spent years buried in estate ledgers and lonely solitary walks now found himself lingering in the estate library, watching Clara read by the firelight, or walking beside her through the manicured frost-kissed gardens. They spoke of history, of philosophy, of the changing face of England as the 19th century neared its close. Clara possessed a sharp, brilliant mind that challenged Arthur's cynical worldview, while Arthur showed her a quiet, profound respect she had never known from the men of her social class. Tensions simmered beneath their disciplined conversations, shared glances across long mahogany dinner tables, fingers brushing fleetingly as they shared a leather-bound manuscript, the unsaid words hanging heavy in the cool air between them. One crisp silver afternoon, while walking near the Grand Lake on the estate grounds, Clara turned to him, the winter breeze pulling stray strands of raven hair across her face. "You carry a deep ghost in this house, Lord Stirling," she said gently. "I see it in the way you look at the empty portraits in the gallery." Arthur stopped near the stone balustrade, looking out over the misty water. His expression hardened, then softened into a tired, rare vulnerability. "5 years ago, I was engaged," he said quietly. "Lady Juliana. I believed we were bound by love. I later discovered she and her family had fabricated the entire courtship to cover her father's catastrophic gambling debts too. Lord Vance, as fate would have it. When the truth emerged, she fled abroad, leaving me with a public scandal, and the realization that nobility is often just a gilded mask for avarice. I swore then never to allow another soul to enter my life under false pretenses. Clara felt a sharp pang in her chest. And yet, you took in a lying stranger hiding in your carriage. You did not lie about who you were, Clara, Arthur said, turning his head to lock his gaze onto hers. It was the first time he had spoken her Christian name without her title, his voice thick with an intensity that made her breath hitch. You fought for your freedom. There is no dishonor in that. Before the moment could deepen, the sharp sound of horse hooves echoing across the gravel drive broke the silence. Arthur's steward rushed down the garden path, holding a sealed black leather portfolio. Your Grace, express courier from London. It was delivered to the village post office under urgent mark. Arthur took the leather pouch, broke the wax seal, and pulled out a stack of parchment. As his eyes scanned the official legal documents, his face paled, his jaw clenching so hard a muscle twitched beneath his cheek. What is it, Arthur? Clara asked, stepping closer, her heart sinking with sudden dread. Arthur looked up from the papers, his voice dropping into a lethal, terrifying stillness. Vance has played his hand, Arthur murmured. He has filed an official petition with the High Court of Chancery in London. He claims that I have unlawfully abducted his legal ward, Miss Clara Hayward, and am holding you here against your will under the influence of coercion. Arthur turned the page, his gray eyes burning like hot iron. And to enforce the order, he has secured a warrant from the Home Office. The High Sheriff of Yorkshire, accompanied by Lord Vance himself, is currently riding for Ashridge Park with armed constables to take you into custody by sunset. The atmosphere inside Ashridge Park shifted from tranquility to a suffocating siege within hours. Outside, a pale, milky fog crept down from the Yorkshire moors, blanketing the dark stone parapets and swallowing the bare oak trees in a ghost-like haze. Inside the Grand Library, surrounded by thousands of leather-bound volumes and illuminated only by the firelight, Arthur stood near his mahogany writing desk, his brow furrowed as he reviewed a mountain of legal charters and family deeds. Clara sat nearby, her small hands tightly clasping a cup of untouched porcelain tea, her heart thumping wildly against her ribs like a trapped bird. If the High Sheriff serves that warrant, Arthur, you will be disgraced, Clara said, her voice strained, trembling with an agonizing mix of guilt and terror. She rose from her chair, the dark green wool of her gown rustling softly against the carpet. You are a Duke of the Realm. A public scandal involving the abduction of an heiress will destroy your standing in Parliament, ruin your family name, and embroil Ashridge in years of litigation. I cannot allow you to suffer for my salvation. I must surrender myself before Vance arrives. Arthur snapped the legal ledger shut, the sound echoing through the vast room like a pistol shot. He crossed the room in swift, decisive strides, stopping mere inches from her. The cold, unyielding aristocrat who had spent 5 years hiding behind iron walls was gone. In his eyes burned a fierce, protective fire that made Clara's breath catch in her throat. You will do no such thing, Arthur commanded softly, his hands rising to gently take her cold fingers into his own. His touch was warm, solid, and terrifyingly reassuring. I have spent years guarding my reputation, Clara, believing it was the only thing I had left worth protecting. But standing here, watching you prepare to sacrifice your life to save my name, I realize how utterly hollow that pride was. Vance will not take you from this house. Not while I draw breath. Clara looked up into his gray eyes, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Arthur, why are you doing this? Why risk everything for a woman who fell into your life by accident?" "Because it was no accident," Arthur murmured, his voice dropping into a low, breathless intimacy that shattered the remaining emotional distance between them. His thumb traced the soft curve of her jawline, causing a shiver to run down her spine. "From the moment you whispered those frantic words in my carriage, you brought light into a life that was dead. I do not defend you out of duty, Clara. I defend you because I cannot bear the thought of a world where you are not free, where you are not mine to protect." Clara's eyes welled with tears. The romantic tension that had simmered between them through stolen glances and shared silences erupted into an overwhelming, breathless truth. "Arthur," she whispered. Before their lips could meet, the heavy oak doors of the library burst open. Jennings, the butler, stood in the doorway, his usually immaculate composure completely shattered. His face was ash pale. "Your Grace! They are at the iron gates. The High Sheriff, Lord Vance, and 6 armed officers of the county constabulary. They demand entry in the name of the crown." Arthur's expression hardened back into cold stone. He gently released Clara's hands, stepping back into the role of the formidable Duke of Stirling. "Gather the household staff, Jennings. Have the men bar the inner oak courtyard doors. We shall receive them in the great hall, and not a moment sooner." 10 minutes later, the massive iron-studded doors of Ashridge Park creaked open, admitting a gust of freezing northern wind and 4 figures dripping with rain. At the front stood Sir Reginald Vance, the Marquis looking impeccably tailored despite the weather, his sharp, rodent-like eyes scanning the grand hall with triumphant malice. Beside him stood the High Sheriff of Yorkshire, wearing a heavy wool cloak and looking thoroughly uncomfortable, holding an official parchment stamped with a red wax seal. "Lord Stirling!" Vance sneered, his tone dripping with condescending arrogance as he stepped onto the polished marble floor. "A grand estate you have here. Pity it has become a haven for criminals and runaway wards. Hand over Miss Hayward at once, or I shall have the sheriff execute this warrant for your arrest on charges of felony abduction." Arthur stood at the top of the grand marble staircase, dressed in an immaculate dark mourning suit, his hands resting casually behind his back. Clara stood just behind his right shoulder, her chin lifted, refusing to show fear before the monster who had terrorized her youth. "You speak bold words in my ancestral home, Vance," Arthur said, his voice ringing out with terrifying, calm authority that echoed off the high-vaulted ceiling. "The High Sheriff knows very well that a warrant for abduction requires proof of unlawful restraint. Miss Hayward is here as my honored guest." "She is a minor ward under my legal guardianship," Vance snapped, his face flushing with anger. "Her father's will grants me absolute control over her person and her property until her 25th birthday." "Does it, Lord Vance?" Clara's voice cut through the air, clear, sharp, and ringing with absolute confidence as she stepped forward down the stairs. Vance sneered up at her. "Silence, girl. You are hysterical just as your late father was in his dying days. Sheriff, arrest the Duke and take her into custody!" "Wait!" Arthur shouted, his voice thundering through the hall. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a yellowed, faded document wrapped in a silk ribbon, along with a newly stamped affidavit from the Archbishop of Canterbury. Vance's eyes narrowed. "What trick is this?" "This is no trick, Vance. This is your undoing," Arthur said calmly, walking slowly down the marble steps until he stood face to face with the Marquis. "While you were riding up the Great North Road with your constables, my private couriers were scouring the registry offices of the Sussex Chancery. We found the original unedited birth register of the Hayward family from the parish of St. Jude. A sudden sharp shadow of fear crossed Vance's face. He stiffened. You forged the date on her legal guardianship documents, Vance? Arthur revealed, his tone dropping into a lethal, quiet accusation. You listed Clara's birth year as 1864 to extend your control over her estate until next year. But Clara was born in November 1863. She turned 25 last week. The High Sheriff gasped, looking instantly at Vance. Lord Vance, is this true? It is a lie, Vance spat, his fists clenching at his sides. A forged document provided by a desperate man. It is verified by the parish rector and the Bishop of London, Arthur countered smoothly, tossing the certified copies to the High Sheriff, who immediately began reading them with a frowning, serious expression. As of 8 days ago, Clara Hayward became a fully independent woman of age under the laws of England. Your guardianship has expired. You have no legal authority over her person, her iron rights, or her movements. Vance's face transformed into a mask of rage. Realizing his entire fortune and reputation were crumbling before his eyes, he reached beneath his wet, heavy cloak, drawing a small, silver-plated pocket pistol concealed within his coat. I will not be ruined by a penniless orphan and an arrogant duke, he snarled, aiming the weapon directly at Clara's chest. No! Arthur roared. Without a second thought for his own life, Arthur lunged forward, throwing his broad body between the barrel of the gun and Clara just as a deafening shot shattered the silence of Ashridge Park. The deafening report of the pistol cracked through the high stone vaults of the great hall, followed instantly by the sharp smell of burnt gunpowder. Clara screamed, the sound torn from the very depths of her soul. Time seemed to fracture into slow, agonizing seconds. Arthur did not fall. The bullet had caught the thick iron mantle of his family signet chain across his chest before ricocheting violently into the marble pillar behind him, leaving a white scar in the ancient stone. Before Vance could cock the hammer a second time, the High Sheriff and 2 of his constables lunged forward with fury. The sheriff struck Vance's wrist with a heavy oak walking stick, sending the silver pistol clattering across the floor. In a flurry of shouts and struggling limbs, the constables tackled the Marquis to the ground, pinning his arms brutally behind his back and forcing his wet, mud-stained face into the cold marble. Sir Reginald Vance! The High Sheriff roared, his voice trembling with outrage and shame at having been made a pawn in a murderous scheme. You are under arrest for attempted murder, high forgery, and treason against the Crown's justice. Take him to the York jail and put him in heavy iron. Vance spat blood onto the floor, his eyes wild and unraveling as he glared up at Arthur. You think you have won, Sterling? Vance hissed, his voice cracking with madness as the guards dragged him toward the heavy oak doors. She used you! You are a fool who fell for a pretty beggar. Arthur did not answer the defeated man. He stood tall, breathing heavily, his broad chest rising and falling as the iron doors slammed shut, swallowing Vance's shrill curses into the howling northern gale outside. Silence returned to Ashridge Park. Heavy, reverent, and unbroken, Arthur turned slowly around. Clara stood at the base of the staircase, her hand pressed over her mouth, her body trembling so violently she could barely stand. Tears traced wet paths down her pale cheeks. Arthur, she whispered, her voice breaking. She closed the distance between them, ignoring every rule of aristocratic decorum, and threw her arms around his neck, burying her face into his chest. She squeezed him with all her strength, needing to feel the warm, steady rhythm of his heart to convince herself he was alive. You took a bullet for me. You could have died. Arthur wrapped his strong arms securely around her waist lifting her slightly off her feet and pulling her close against him. He rested his forehead against hers, closing his eyes as a deep, profound relief washed over his entire being. The wall of ice he had carried around his heart for 5 long years did not just crack. It shattered into dust. "I would have faced 1,000 bullets, Clara," Arthur murmured, his voice thick with an emotion so raw and authentic it made her heart swell to bursting. "I told you. I will let no harm come to you. Not ever again." He raised his head, his gray eyes searching her tear-streaked face with intoxicating devotion. Slowly, deliberately, Arthur leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was soft at first, filled with the lingering shock of danger, before deepening into a passionate, breathtaking promise of safety, honor, and undeniable love. Clara melted into his embrace, her fingers tangling in the dark hair at the nape of his neck, giving herself entirely to the man who had rescued her from darkness and given her a home. 3 months later, the sun rose over the rolling green dales of Yorkshire, bathing the stone walls of Ashridge Park in golden spring light. The bitter fog of winter was gone, replaced by blooming wild roses and green meadows that stretched as far as the eye could see. In the small, elegant chapel situated on the edge of the Stirling estate, the heavy brass bells chimed merrily across the valley. London high society had talked for weeks. The papers had been full of the shocking downfall of Lord Vance, whose forged deeds were stripped and whose assets were frozen by the High Court. But inside the quiet chapel, far from the malicious gossip of Mayfair drawing rooms, only true devotion filled the room. Clara stood at the altar, looking radiant in a high-collared gown of ivory silk laced with French lace, a crown of fresh white roses resting upon her dark curls. Beside her stood Arthur, his dark eyes glowing with a quiet, boundless happiness that the servants of Ashridge had never seen before. As the old vicar blessed their union, Arthur took Clara's hand, sliding a thick band of Welsh gold onto her finger alongside his ancestral diamond ring. "With this ring I thee wed," Arthur spoke softly, his voice firm and filled with absolute clarity. "My heart, my home, and my life are yours, Clara, forever." Clara looked into the eyes of the Duke, who had once found her hiding beneath a velvet rug in a wet Mayfair street, a man who had claimed her as his Duchess in a moment of desperate deception, only to make that lie the greatest truth of their lives. "And mine are yours, my lord," she whispered, a brilliant, tearful smile illuminating her face. "Until the end of our days." Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the Yorkshire sky in shades of crimson and violet, Arthur and Clara walked hand in hand along the stone balustrade overlooking the Grand Lake. The evening air was soft, carrying the fragrance of lavender and earth. Arthur pulled Clara gently against his side, wrapping his coat around her shoulder to shield her from the cool night breeze, just as he had done on the stormy night they first met. "No more hiding in carriages, Your Grace," Arthur murmured teasingly into her hair, a gentle smile gracing his lips. Clara leaned back against his chest, watching the stars begin to flicker over the vast, peaceful waters of Ashridge. "No, Arthur," she answered softly, resting her hand over his. "The hiding is over. I have finally found where I belong. In a world governed by cold titles, calculated inheritances, and rigid social boundaries, 2 wounded souls had dared to cross the divide. The secret that had begun in the dark shadows of a desperate escape had blossomed into an unyielding legacy of true love, a bond that no scandal, no storm, and no passage of time could ever shatter.